I'll just say again, thank you all so much for being here today, and I'm just going to sort of explain, in case anybody's sitting in the audience wondering, why are we here at PRONI and how did this come about? And it really came about, we started, we're partnered in PRONI on another project at the minute called Making the Future, and through this we've been looking for the last 18 months particularly at women's history, and when we started to look at it we had noticed a few different gaps in the collection. I was putting together an exhibition that was really trying to find out about women's experiences in their own words, and one of the collections I was using to do that was the Cara-Friend collection, and using the letters written to Cara-Friend at the time. But aside from the Cara-Friend letters, we were finding it quite difficult to find particularly women's experiences, but even just any LGBT history. We knew we had some, and it was great that we had it, but we wanted more than that. And we put a call out to sort of have an event to say, if you have anything, or if you know if anybody has anything, or you want to get involved in this conversation, come along. And it was after that I met Jeff for the first time. We met here, and as soon as Jeff and I met in this building, we very much knew that we were kind of speaking the same language, as far as our passion for finding archives and history from a grassroots level up, and that was what we wanted to do. And from then on, we talked a lot about PRONI and how could we do that, how could we advocate for this within PRONI. And Jeff talked about out in the Past Festival and how we could apply to become a hub. So I was very keen that we would apply to become a hub for this, and was very pleased that we were able to get it. And after that, then Jeff put me in touch with Adam from Cara-Friend, and this great partnership sort of began from there. And we're really, really happy to be hosting this event today. We're particularly glad to be partnering with Cara-Friend. We're very happy to have their collection here. We're happy that their collection is growing through this partnership. And it's exactly the way that we want things to be moving. We're very passionate here in PRONI about collecting records, about preserving them and making them accessible as much as we can. We want to tell as many different stories as we can from this place, so that in 100 years time people will actually know what people's lives were like, not only a certain group of individuals, but as many as we can collect from here in Northern Ireland. So that's how we got here, and it's been great. I'm hoping it's really just the beginning of lots of other things that will happen, and partnerships that will grow, and we'll be building bridges and partnerships all over the place. And at the end of the session today, we have some students that have been with Cara-Friend, and they've been in here in PRONI engaging with the collection as well, and that's been great for us too, to have people really engage with the collection and be able to feed that information back to us. So there's just lots of great stuff that's coming out of this already, and I really hope all of you enjoy the day. And I'm going to pass over now to Adam. Right.
Could you?
Hi, yes, my name is Adam Murray. I'm the Community Services Manager with Cara-Friend, and today is very much a labour of love and many, many different hands. And you've heard some of the different people who partnered and worked together to make this happen. I have to say, we were really worried it wasn't going to happen, but you're all here now and everything seems to be working. Just to give you a bit of a rundown on how Cara-Friend has got involved in this and where our journey has been. So in 2017, I believe, we sent one of my colleagues, Declan Meehan, over to the Out in the Past conference in Liverpool, which they found really interesting and incredibly useful. And they came back and said, oh, they run hubs of this festival all around Great Britain. We should have one in Northern Ireland, and we should bring the festival to this island. So in 2018 and 2019, we ran hubs. Well, in 2018 we ran a hub, about the first hub in Ireland we ran up in the Ulster Museum, which was great, and we were very, very grateful for their support on this as well. So we had that in 2018, the first hub, and it was a huge success, and Jeff helped launch it along with Senator Norris and others, and it was wildly successful, I think I can modestly say. But in 2019 then you saw there was a hub in Belfast, there was a hub in Foyle, there was a hub in Dublin, and a hub in Cork. So right away there was obviously interest, it grew very fast, and from that also you get like the likes of Jeff's work on the Outing the North exhibition, which was launched in Derry, Strickland and Derry earlier this year, which is accessible now for everybody to see. But like, the list goes on. There are so many things that have come from that first hub and that first experience of going to the conference, but that was really what sparked it off. So now we have, as has been referenced, a working relationship with Queen's University, something that we never really had a consistent way, where we're working with them, offering placements to students, and we have 3 students here today who I'm sure you will absolutely love to hear from. And also from that, there's also in a separate part of Queen's University, they're doing a project on Mark Ashton and looking into the history of Mark Ashton when he lived here. So there's already another bridge that is being built from this partnership. Dr. Richard O'Leary, who's here, has just launched earlier this year the LGBT Heritage project funded by the Heritage Fund, and you'll have leaflets on your chairs. That we're, again, a partnership of Kira and I, Cara-Friend, the Rainbow Project. We're very much putting out an open call for stories, for artifacts. If you have anything at all that you think might be of relevance, an old love letter, an old badge, a t-shirt, a leaflet, anything at all, just come and have a conversation with Richard or myself or someone else in the community. We'll find out what your options are, the options for the storytelling whenever we do get past this current pandemic and start doing that level of engagement. There will be options. You can tell your story. It can be hosted in public on a website eventually. You can tell your story and it can only be accessible to academics, or you could tell your story and it'll be either one or the other, but only after you've passed. It's entirely up to you, and we will work with you to make sure that you get what you want out of that experience. Likewise with artifacts, I know with PRONI, if you have a document that you hold particularly sacred, you can loan it to PRONI. You don't have to give it to them. You can say, look, I'm going to allow you to have this, and academics and such can have a look at it, but I do want it to be kept in my name, or you can donate it. So there's all sorts of different options, and I hope that people will go away today maybe thinking either if they have something themselves or if they know someone else who can't be here today who might have something to share. And I think that the natural progression that we are on, I'll close with this, the natural progression we're going on is that there are so many different organisations now showing an interest. The LGBT sector, the museums, different museums, the Public Records Office, civic bodies such as my funder, Belfast City Council. I think we're moving in the direction of setting up some sort of LGBT History Month network in the city of Belfast to make History Month a real month of events and also to increase the effectiveness of the hubs. So thank you all for coming here. I'm really, really appreciative of it. I hope you enjoy our wonderful speakers, some who have come over from England, and I know that all of them have put their heart and soul into their presentations. So without any further ado, thank you so much, everybody. Thank you. Oh, and Kris Reid is our first person up with Queering the Castle.
Hello.
Thank you very much.
Oh,
Lynsey will switch over to your presentation while you talk, sure.
well, while that's happening, I'll do a short introduction to myself. My name is Kris Reid. As Adam said, I come from Hillsborough Castle at the minute. I'm an assistant interpretation officer there. And I'm also doing a PhD at Ulster University, looking at how museums and heritage sites and spaces like this engage with LGBT history and LGBT stories. Today I'm going to talk specifically about the LGBTQ+ tour at Hillsborough Castle and Gardens, which is something I wrote and deliver once a month. It's the last Saturday of every month at 11:45 a.m, so please do come. And it's something I did in collaboration with the amazing curatorial team at Hillsborough Castle, as well as the public engagement team there as well. So I'm going to focus a bit on the tour and tell you some of the stories. But before that, I thought it would be quite useful to give you a bit of a brief history of Hillsborough Castle for those of you that don't know it very well, and also to give you a bit of context about it too. So, I suppose the first thing to point out is that it doesn't look anything like a castle. It is a very traditional looking Irish country house, and you see that a lot in Ireland. There are many different country houses that would apply the word castle to it to make it seem like they were here for much, much longer than they actually were. But it was built originally in the mid-18th century by the Hill family, or the Marquisates of Downshire, and they lived in it and owned it up until the 1920s. And this is one of my favourite photos of some of the Hill family. It's a very, yes, I thought it was a bit gay, queer looking. But I also think it shows the lovely theatricals that they loved to engage in back then too. And they were a rather eccentric family, and initially when we started looking at the history of Hillsborough Castle, we thought, oh my goodness, this family have nothing interesting going on. But what we've realised is that is the complete opposite of the truth, and they are fascinating. So this is a photo that was taken outside Hillsborough Castle in the late 19th century. And as I say, it was owned by then up until the 1920s, but of course then we had partition. At the time of partition, the family sold the house, and it was later purchased by the newly formed Northern Ireland government, who were looking for a residence for the new role of governor of Northern Ireland. And the house was lived in by the governors up until 1972, when direct rule was imposed on Northern Ireland, and the governor role was abolished, and we had our secretaries of state. And the secretaries of state have lived there ever since. They use it as their residence when they're in Northern Ireland. We've had quite a lot of them recently. And they do use it as an active space. They are there a lot. And similarly, the royals are there as well. We have a royal visit maybe every month or so too. But just to run you through and to really, I suppose, hone in on how significant Hillsborough Castle is, mostly in our recent political history, but a number of key events have taken place there. So this is a photo of Margaret Thatcher and the Taoiseach Gareth Fitzgerald signing the Anglo-Irish Agreement in the drawing room at Hillsborough Castle. Much of the Good Friday Agreement was negotiated at Hillsborough Castle, so we have Jerry Adams and Martin McGuinness there outside the house as well. There's Tony Blair with Mulholland, the Secretary of State, talking about the Good Friday Agreement and its signing. This was a really significant event. So this was Her Majesty the Queen meeting the then President of Ireland, Merryman, and that was the first time that the sitting head, the first time that the head of the British state had met with the head of the Irish state on the island of Ireland. And many people believe it was this event that led to the Queen's visit to Dublin a number of years later. We had George Bush meeting with Tony Blair in the Gardens. Leo Varadkar met with the press here just last year talking about Brexit. I was told that's not a very flattering photo, but I quite like it. And then of course the royals as well. So again, this was just taken towards the end of last year. That's Wills and Kate doing some diplomatic conversations with people in the drawing room. So hopefully that gives you an insight into how this is a really significant space. It's still a used house, it's still a used estate. It's not like a National Trust property in a way, because it is actually an actively used home and diplomatic space too. So to bring us up to the present day, back in 2014, Historic Royal Palaces took on the management of Hillsborough Castle and Gardens. And we are the charity that looks after the Tower of London, Hampton Court Palace, Kensington Palace, Kew and Banqueting House. I'm really proud of myself for remembering all those, because I never do. And of course Hillsborough Castle. So it's the only property that we look after outside of London. And it was decided very early on that Hillsborough Castle was going to be looking at histories beyond what was obvious. And as an organisation back in 2014 as well, or sorry, back in 2017, we realised particularly that the stories we were telling were focusing too much on a certain specific group. So we were looking too much at white, heterosexual, able-bodied, cisgendered, wealthy individuals. And I always say this, but when you say that list out loud, that's a very, very narrow perspective on society and on the world around us. And so as an organisation, we started taking a look at different histories that are just as important, just as relevant, but because of the structures of our society, haven't necessarily been told until now. So we started looking at women's history, at migration, colonialism, as well as LGBT history as well. So in 2018, I started researching in collaboration with the team the LGBTQ+ tour at Hillsborough Castle, and it's one of a number of specialist tours that we offer. So we also have a politics tour, a royal tour, a family tour, an art tour, and they all run monthly. And as well as that, we have a number of different talks and events taking place that look at women's history. We work with a number of different community groups around disability issues. So we really are trying to broaden the scope of what this space actually is. And it was very important to me that we didn't try to only celebrate the positive histories of Hillsborough Castle, that we also acknowledged the negative forces that can be in place from the oppressive power structures that can exist in our world. And of course Hillsborough Castle is at the moment the seat of the Secretary of State, and it's the official residence of the royal family in Northern Ireland, so you have to acknowledge that as well, and all of their roles in the oppression that we still see across the world. I'm not going to make this entirely negative and Debbie Downer, I promise. But always bringing it back to the present day. So that's my big thing. I really want to make sure that when we look at the past, we're always bringing those stories within a modern context as well. So telling stories of things that happened 300 years ago, but looking at how that can be applied to the present day as well, and encouraging people and challenging people to question their own long-held beliefs on different things too. So today I thought it would be quite fun to give you a bit of a virtual tour of Hillsborough Castle using photographs, and to try and encourage you to come on the tour and hear the rest of the stories. I won't tell you everything, but I wanted to give you a bit of an insight into the ways in which you can queer a collection, or how you can use a collection to tell LGBTQ+ stories. And before I start, I should point out that we didn't introduce any new objects with the intention of telling these stories. We used what we already had, and I was really shocked when I started doing the research to see how much was already there waiting to be told. So my challenge is to anybody that works in an institution similar to ours to do something similar, because you'll be surprised by what you find. So I'll start off. This is our state entrance hall. This has always been the state entrance hall at Hillsborough Castle. And we focus on a number of stories in here, but the first one I'm going to focus on is this person here. So anybody who hasn't been on the tour or doesn't know who this is, does anybody know who it is, actually, out of curiosity? With a show of hands. The clue is in the colour of their dress. Hey, well done. It's King Billy, yes. So this is the young Prince William of Orange, and this is him depicted in a way that many of us probably wouldn't expect to see William of Orange depicted. We often see him riding a horse, defeating James II at the Battle of the Boyne, but this is him as a young boy. And I think we don't talk about this too much on the tour, but one of the most striking things about this painting is that he has been depicted wearing a dress, which actually in that period was fairly common. Young boys and young girls up until the age of maybe 7 or 8 would have worn the same clothing, and it was only around 7 or 8 that boys would go through a formal process known as breeching, which sounds like a painful act to implement on somebody, but it just means that they get a pair of trousers, essentially. But I love this painting because it already immediately challenges your perception of William of Orange, and it's very, very different from what we're used to. But what we actually focus on the tour is the fact that throughout his life, William of Orange was the subject of rumours regarding his sexuality and his relationships with men. And he's very significant for us at Hillsborough Castle as well, because he stayed at the original residence of the Hill family, Hillsborough Fort, which is just across the road from us. So there is that big connection there, and of course he's very relevant to us here on the island of Ireland too. But throughout his life, there were many rumours spread throughout the country that he had relationships with men, and there were a couple of men in particular that was focused on, but the rumours really kicked off after the death of his wife, Mary, in the late 1690s. And it was all around his relationship with this man called Arnold Just van Keppel, which is a really fabulous name. It's my name to shame. He was another Dutch nobleman, and he had worked for the king as a page, which is a fairly junior role, and he'd had that role up until he was about the age of 26 or 27. And at that time, William elevated him to the role of an earl, which is a massive jump in terms of titles, and a very big title for a 27-year-old to have. And it was very clear that the king was enamored with him. He thought he was absolutely fantastic, and they spent a lot of time together. When Hampton Court Palace was being, the extension to Hampton Court Palace was being built, William made sure that his room was adjacent to his, and his wife's was on the other end of the building. And actually, if you look at the architectural plans for Hampton Court at that time, it's very unclear where William's bedroom begins and Keppel's bedroom finishes. So there's this very strange queer architecture going on at Hampton Court Palace. But we see evidence in letters about this fascination. There was one woman called the Duchess of Orleans who said, it seems that the king is in love with Keppel as with a woman, and kisses his hand for all the royal court. People were spreading rumours about him left, right and centre throughout the city of London. And it's not entirely clear, and I'll get to that in a wee minute, but it's not entirely clear whether these were actual rumours rooted in fact, or if they were being used as a way to try to undermine him. So that's something we try to talk about on the tour, and this is the example of me bringing it up to the present day. So if you look at British historians, they are very quick to say, oh no, there's no way he was having relationships with men, don't be ridiculous. These were just salacious rumours, these were just people trying to tear him down. He was a new king, he'd taken the crown by force, and this was a great way for them to target him. But if you look at Dutch historians, which of course William is Dutch, they're very quick to say, of course he was having relationships with men. In fact, they don't even dwell on it that much. They just make it a very obvious statement of fact. Of course he was having relationships with men. And they do point out that he loved his wife. He said that he went from being the happiest and most miserablest creature on earth when she died, but that doesn't mean he wasn't having relationships with men as well. And I think for me, he's a really wonderful example of how, as LGBT historians or people looking at these stories in the past, we're constantly expected to provide evidence. And if we don't have evidence, then we're immediately shut down. And they say, well, if you don't have the proof, we don't want to hear it. And unfortunately, as I mentioned at the start, the power structures in place did not allow us to have that evidence. So we have to interpret these stories in different ways. We don't ask for detailed letters of sexual relationships between heterosexual couples, but for some reason we expect it between same-sex couples too. So William's a really interesting one, potentially a little bit controversial, but he's one that I absolutely love. This is also in the State Entrance Hall. So this is a painting of Mary of Modena. We have a number of people who come into the house and actually think this is a painting of a man. And that's not unsurprising, because Mary has actually had herself painted here wearing men's clothes. So she's had her hair styled to look like she's wearing a man's wig, and she's wearing masculine riding gear. Now, I adore this painting. I think it's a bit sexy. I don't know if you can see, but she's holding a little whip and everything as well. But within the context of Hillsborough Castle, every other painting of women in the State Entrance Hall shows them, just draped in beautiful clothing with their bosom on show, looking off in the distance at something, and very much painted for the male gaze. Whilst Mary has had herself looking dead straight at you, covered head to toe in this very masculine, powerful clothing. And it really challenged me when I first saw it to question my own attitudes to gender and gender expression in the past, because I think we have this idea that we are this forward-thinking Western world that has moved in a gradual, progressive way. But actually people in the past, this is the 17th century, were playing with gender in ways that we even today might find strange. Now, it's actually not a strange depiction of somebody from that time. It was quite fashionable for women to wear masculine clothing in the late 17th century, particularly for going riding and hunting. And you even see it right up into the 1920s. Women would wear bowler hats and very tight waistcoats to go out hunting as well. But it's to challenge people to think differently about gender and about identity, and remind people that things are not as fixed as we might think that they are. So we'll leave the State Entrance Hall and head to the throne room. And in here I focus on this object in particular. So this is an object that belonged to the Ulster King of Arms. It's the Ulster King of Arms tabard. And on the right hand side you can see the last owner of this particular tabard. And this is a man called Sir Arthur Vickers. And this is a great story, and some of you might actually already know this story. We're very lucky to have this in our collection. And his job, amongst a number of other things, was to look after a collection of objects known as the Irish Crown Jewels. They were the insignia of the Order of St. Patrick, and they were used for royal investitures at Dublin Castle. And on the night of the 6th of July 1907, it was discovered that the jewels had been taken from inside a safe in Dublin Castle. And they'd been taken from inside the safe in a fortified room in one of the most fortified structures in the heart of Dublin, without any force. And no one could understand how this possibly could have happened. So of course, all eyes immediately turned to Sir Arthur Vickers, who was in charge of taking care of them. And unfortunately, he didn't have a very good reputation at that time either. He was known for being a bit of a drinker. And it was said that on a number of occasions he woke up with the jewels draped around his neck, with absolutely no recollection of how they got there. Now, at the time, he was living in a house in Dublin with his assistant, Francis Shackleton. And Shackleton was the brother of the explorer Ernest Shackleton, who you might have heard of. And Shackleton, there's plenty of evidence to say that Shackleton had relationships with men. Even at the time, people were talking about the fact that Shackleton slept with men. We don't really know about Sir Arthur Vickers for sure, but we do know that he used to throw very wild parties in the Office of Arms at Dublin Castle. And it's on one of these occasions that he claimed that his assistant Shackleton got him drunk, took the key from his pocket that held the jewels in the safe, had a wax impression made, got a copy done, returned the keys, and he was none the wiser, which is quite an elaborate scheme. But of course he was very quick to make sure the blame wasn't assigned to him. Now, even worse for him, at that time, Edward VII was on his way to Ireland for a royal investiture and would need the jewels. And it was said that when he found out they were taken, he was absolutely furious. And he immediately ordered a royal commission to investigate what had happened. But within about 2 weeks, the royal commission was disbanded and the investigation was suppressed. And to this day, the jewels have never been found, and we don't actually know what happened to them. So if you have a metal detector, do feel free to go out looking, but I don't think you'll find them. Now, some people have questioned, why was it suppressed? Why was this investigation closed down? And it has been suggested that the king caught wind that Francis Shackleton was involved in this drama. And Shackleton was a close friend of the Duke of Argyll, who was the brother-in-law of King Edward VII. Throwing loads of names at you here. But the Duke of Argyll had already been embroiled in some of his own scandals and gossip at the time too. So it's been suggested that the king did not want in any way his family to be associated with a homosexual scandal or with homosexuality. So he was actually willing to sacrifice these jewels in order to prevent that association, which is mad. I think that's absolutely mad, and you have to question whether that would still happen today. As for Sir Arthur Vickers, he wasn't blamed for the theft, but he was largely blamed for his own ineptitude and stripped of his titles. And he spent the rest of his days in relative obscurity in County Kerry. And in the 1920s, he was eventually taken from his home and shot in the head by the IRA, and his house was burnt to the ground. So he didn't have the happiest ending. And as for Shackleton, we don't really know if anything particularly happened to him around this specific story, but we do know he spent some time in jail a bit later in his life too. But on that happy note, we're going to go to my favourite room in the house. So this is the red room. And in here we try to do a little bit of queer art interpretation, which was a new concept for me. But I went to see a tour at the National Gallery of Ireland, where that is solely what they do, and I absolutely fell in love with the concept. So the idea is looking at works of art that are on display, but just through a different lens and a different perspective. So I'm going to focus on this particular painting here. So for those of you who are well versed in your religious stories and history, you might know who these people are already, but don't shout it out. What I ask visitors to do on the tour is to merely look at the works of art and describe what they see. And for me, when I saw this painting, I saw two men intimately embracing one another in a way that you don't often see men depicted in art. They are leaning towards each other's faces, they are holding hands, and it's a really, really intimate piece of art. It also happens to be the oldest piece of art in the house. It dates from the late 15th century, and I think it's absolutely breathtaking. Because in the past, LGBT or queer people didn't have pieces of art that were meant for them. It's very rare to find pieces of art that actively depict people who are queer or LGBT with the intention of doing so, and any that were created probably don't survive. So as a community, we've had to find objects or find pieces of art or find pop culture even that we can see ourselves represented in and apply ourselves to, and I think this is one really beautiful example of how people might have been done, or people might have done that in the past. And I often ask the question, if the intention had been for this to be an LGBT piece of art or a depiction of same-sex love, do we really think that it would have survived for 500 years? And the answer is probably not. The painting actually depicts St. Francis of Assisi and St. Dominic embracing one another. You can always tell it's St. Francis because he's wearing a hoodie and he has stigmata bursting out of him. So that's him on the right-hand side. And this is telling the story of their first meeting in Rome in 1216. And to this day, Franciscans and Dominicans still meet on their respective saints' feast day as a mark of respect. But when I was doing some research into this, I found some really queer elements to St. Francis's life as well. He is well known for embracing poverty and for giving up his wealth. And he loved people knowing that he was this person of poverty. We know that he had an all-male brotherhood, but he did admit women into it, provided they shaved their hair and referred to themselves as brother. He liked his followers to call him mother. And there's one really fabulous story which involves him walking along a road with a companion, and they came upon three women on the side of the road. And when the women saw him, they said, "Welcome, Lady Poverty," which was a title he was delighted to receive. And thinking they were beggars, he asked his companion to give them a coin, and when doing so, they were said to disappear. And he would always recount this as a vision of the Lord, and he would actually, in his own accounts, described this as the Holy Trinity presenting itself to him in an all-female form. And when you look at later narratives or later interpretations of this story, it's chopped and changed and twisted to the point that Francis comes upon one woman and marries her, and she's called Lady Poverty. So it's a little bit different, and you have to wonder, was this story changed because people didn't like the idea of him being called Lady Poverty and enjoying it? Or what I think is more likely, people didn't like the idea of an all-female Holy Trinity. So we do a bit more interpretation in there, but you have to come on the tour to find out the rest. I've only got a couple more to go. So this is the dining room at Hillsborough Castle, set up for a dinner. It's another really, really beautiful room. And in this room, we focus on this individual here. So this is Lord Hillsborough. He would later become the 4th Marquess of Downshire. He lived at Hillsborough Castle. There's a statue of him in the middle of Hillsborough. He's a very imposing man. And in the mid-1830s, his father, who was the current Marquess, was having a bit of a problem with him because he had gotten into this very, very bad habit of killing people, which isn't good when you are well known in society. And our curators have so far managed to find, I think, 4 confirmed kills that were reported in the press. It just shows you that money apparently helped to get away with murder in the 19th century. But on this occasion, he was around 21, and he had gotten into a fight with the favourite son of the Marquess of Liverpool when he was at university in Oxford, and killed him. And another problem was that Lord Hillsborough loved talking to the press, and he loved telling them that it wasn't his fault, he didn't mean to do it, he'd gone into a fight, and his family thought, right, we need to get rid of you, we need to get this to hush down a bit. And because he was 21, it was the time when most young men of this class were going on the grand tour. So usually they would go around and see the sights of Europe. They would see ancient Greece, they would see ancient Rome, they would pilfer objects and put them in our museums here. But on this occasion they thought there's going to be too many people there, let's send them to Scandinavia. So he did his grand tour around Denmark. But when he was in Denmark, he met a very, very interesting individual, and that was this person. So that's Anne Lister, yes, also known as Gentleman Jack. So some of you might have watched the BBC One drama about her. She is a really fascinating figure for anybody that doesn't know her. So she's very famous now for her encrypted diaries, which she wrote in code, and were only really deciphered long after her death. We're talking around the 1830s here at this point, and she made it very clear in her diaries that she was solely attracted to women, that she enjoyed having sex with women, that she thought women were the best thing on earth, and she had absolutely no interest in being with a man. So there is some very concrete evidence of this woman engaging in same-sex activity. And I should point out, and I do point this out on the tour, that finding stories about queer women in the past can be very, very challenging, because men were of course criminalised and women were not. So although it's for a negative reason, we do have that evidence that men were being caught doing these things as well in the past. But there's Anne Lister writing it bold as brass in her diary, which is absolutely fabulous. And the two of them became travel companions. So Lord Hillsborough and Anne Lister travelled around Denmark together. We know that she put herself down as his wife when they crossed borders. They continued to write letters to each other afterwards. There's one letter we've seen where they both describe to each other how beautiful the Princess of Denmark is. And it's led us to wonder, we're still looking into it because we found this quite recently, but it's led us to wonder, how much did he know about her identity? How much did he know about her relationships with women? Because she also presented herself in what would have been a rather different style for the day. She presented herself in a very masculine way, which is where she got the name Gentleman Jack from as well. So we're still looking into it, and we don't know all the facts yet. I'm not embarrassed to tell you this, and this is another little insight into how difficult it is to research these histories, that the only reason we found out about this connection was because Lord Hillsborough was mentioned on the BBC Gentleman Jack drama. And one of our team who's here at the back heard it on Sunday night and texted everyone how excited she was. And when we looked it up online, we found out that the BBC had done a lot of good research, because it turns out they actually did know each other. But that's a little insight. You can't, hopefully eventually we can, you can't come to a records office and type in lesbian or gay and find everything. Of course we're working towards better, but you have to sometimes accidentally come upon it, and in other cases you have to be a bit more creative about how you try to find these stories as well. I just want to finish by saying this is still a fairly new tour and a really new concept for us, and and we're constantly researching and constantly trying to introduce new stories. And so if anybody knows anything or knows any connection to Hillsborough Castle that they think should be told in the tour, we'd love to hear it. We talk about the decriminalisation process in Northern Ireland and how the Secretaries of State who looked at Hillsborough Castle did absolutely nothing to help it. We try to bring it up to the present day as much as possible, but we of course want to introduce more. The big thing we want to do is really challenge people's perceptions of what Hillsborough Castle is. Of course it is the seat of the British monarchy and the British state in many ways in Northern Ireland, and that comes with a lot of weight. And I think one of the best places to challenge different forces is from within their own house. And that's what we're going to continue to try and do. So thank you very much.